Portrait of a Lady by Khushwant Singh. So let us know little bit about the author Khushwant Singh. Khushwant, Khushwant Singh was a renowned Indian author, journalist, and historian known for his sharp wit. He wrote novels like Train to Pakistan. He is exploring the themes of partition, human nature, and Indian history with deep insight. Before we discuss about the chapter paragraph wise, let us know first of all the inferred meanings of these phrases that it is given in this context. First, the thought was almost revolting. Here it means that the idea was very unpleasant or disturbing. Second, a very veritable bedlam of chirrupings. Here it means a true and chaotic noise of bird sounds. Third, an expanse of pure white serenity. Here it means a large area characterized by peaceful and calm witness. Fourth, frivolous rebukes. Here it means light-hearted or trivial criticisms. Fifth, a turning point, a critical moment or event that causes significant change. Sixth, the sieging skins of the dilapidated. Here it means the worn out and dropping surfaces of an old damaged drum. And the last inferred meaning means accepted her seclusion with resignation. Here it means endured her solitude with a sense of acceptance and lack of resistance. So these were the meaning that is inferred here in this context. And if you want to write, pause the video and write it. But as usual, I remind when you listen this video, you should have your textbook in front of you so that at least you can write down your notes with your pencil. That is the best thing because the chances is there that you might hear my voice as a glitch sounds comes. So that time you will find it very easy to understand how to pronunciate the word properly. Due to the hardware only, it has some glitches. So it is to be correct soon. But for the time being, it is not possible for me. So excuse me. But let us continue to understand the chapter, The Portrait of a Lady by Khushwant Singh. And connecting to this chapter, there is another one poetry that is a photograph. So the next video that would be uploaded. So let us continue with first paragraph of this chapter. My grandmother, my grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. She had been old and wrinkled for the 20 years that I had known her. People said that she had once been young and pretty and had even had a husband, but that was hard to believe. My grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. He wore a big turban and loose-fitting clothes. His long white beard covered the best part of his chest, and he looked at least 100 years old. He did not look the sort of person who would have a wife or children. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. As for my grandmother being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. She often told us of the games she used to play as a child that seemed quite absurd and undignified on her part, and we treated it like the fables of the prophets she used to tell us. So, here in this paragraph, first paragraph of this chapter, the portrait of the grandmother, okay, or you can say the portrait of a lady, which is given by Khushwant Singh. So, in this first paragraph, the narrator describes his grandmother, who whose portrait portrait was as an old wrinkled woman. The narrator has known her for 20 years and finds it hard to imagine that she was ever young and beautiful despite hearing people say about her so. Above the mantelpiece in the drawing room hangs a portrait of the narrator's grandfather, who looks very old and wise, further reinforcing the idea that they belong to a different generation. The narrator feels that the image of his grandmother as a young pretty woman is almost unbelievable and somewhat unsettling. She shares stories of her childhood games, but the narrator finds these tales silly and feels they diminish her dignity, treating them more like fables than real memories. Overall, the passage conveys a sense of disconnect between the narrator's perception of his grandmother's current state and the idea of her having a youthful past. Continuing with the next paragraph, she had always been short and fat and slightly bent. Her face was a crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. No, we were certain she had always been as we had known her, old, so terribly old that she could not have grown older and had stayed at the same age for 20 years. She could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. She hobbled about the house in spotless white with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop and the other the beads of her rosary. Her silver locks were scattered untidily over her pale, punctured face, and her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer. Yes, she was beautiful. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains. An expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and content. So, in this paragraph, the narrator describes his grandmother in more detailed way. He notes that she has always been short, fat, and slightly bent, with a face covered in many wrinkles. The narrator believes she has always looked this way and that she is so old that seems to have stopped aging, having remained the same for the past 20 years. While thinks she could never have been pretty, acknowledges that she is beautiful in her own way. The grandmother moves around the house dressed in clean white clothes, using one hand to support her bent posture and the other to count the beads of her rosary as she prays silently. Her silver hair is disheveled and her lips are often moving in prayer. The narrator describes more about her beauty as similar to a peaceful winter landscape symbolizing purity and tranquility. Overall, this paragraph highlights the grandmother's inner beauty and the sense of calm and contentment she brings to her surroundings. My grandmother and I were good friends. My parents left me with her when they went to live in the city and we were constantly together. She used to wake me up in the morning and get me ready for school. She said her morning prayer in a monotonous while she bathed and dressed in the hope that I would listen and get to it by heart. I listened because I loved her voice, but never bothered to learn it. Then she would fetch my wooden slate, which she had already washed and plastered with a yellow chalk, a tiny earthen ink pot, and a red pen. Tie them all in a bundle and hand it after a breakfast of a stale chapati with a little sugar spread on it. We went to school. She carried several slate chapatis with her for the village box. So here we can understand that the narrator tried to describes the activities that her grandmother does. More about activities. So the narrator shares a warm relationship with his grandmother. When his parents moved to the city, they left him in her care and they spent a lot of time. Every morning she would wake him up and help him get ready for the school. While she bathed and dressed him, she would recite her morning prayer in a rhythmic way, hoping he would memorize it. Although he loved to listen to her voice, he didn't make an effort to learn the prayer. After getting ready, the grandmother would prepare his school supplies in wooden slate, a tiny ink pot, red pen, all neatly bundled for him. They would have breakfast together, which consisted of a thick stale chapati with butter and sugar. After breakfast, they would walk to school, and the grandmother would bring extra stale chapatis for the village dogs. So, finally, this paragraph highlights the close bondage relation between the narrator and his grandmother, filled with love, routine, and simple daily activities. My grandmother always went to school with me because the school was to the temple. The priest taught us alphabet and the morning prayer while the children sat in rows on either veranda singing the alphabet prayer in a chorus. My inside reading the scriptures. When we had both finished, we would walk back together. This time the village dogs would meet us at the temple door. They followed us to our home, growling and fighting with each other for the chapatis we threw to them. So, here in this paragraph, the narrator again describes how his grandmother would accompany him to school, which was located next to the temple. At school, the priest taught the children the alphabet and the morning prayer. While the children sang together on the veranda, the grandmother would sit inside reading religious scriptures. After their school day, the grandmother and the narrator would walk home together. On their way back to would be greeted by the village dogs at the temple door. The dogs would follow them eagerly, competing for the stray chapatis that the narrator and his grandmother would throw at them. The passage emphasizes the grandmother's constant presence in the narrator's life, showcasing their daily routine and the warmth of their relationship, early interaction with the village dogs. When my parents were comfortably settled in the city, they sent for us. That was a turning point in our friendship. Although we shared the same room, my grandmother no longer came to school with me. I used to go to an English school in a there were no dog streets, and she took to feeding sparrows courtyard of our city house. In this part, the narrator reflects on a significant change in his life when his parents settled in the city and called for him and his grandmother to join. This move marked a turning point in their close friendship. Even though they still shared a room, the grandmother stopped accompanying him to school. Instead of going to school together, the narrator now attended an English school and traveled by motor bus. In environment meant there were no dogs swimming on the streets like in their village. As a result, the grandmother found new companionship by feeding sparrows in the courtyard of their city house. So this passage highlights the impact the move to the city on the relationship and the adjustment the grandmother had to make in her daily life. As the years rolled by, we saw less of each other. For some time, she continued to wake me up and get me ready for school. When I came back, she would ask me what the teacher had taught me. I would tell her English words and little things of Western science learning, the law of gravity, Archimedes' principle, the world being round, etc. Made her unhappy. She could not help me with my lessons. She did not believe in the things taught at the school, English school, and was distressed that there was no teaching about God and the scriptures. One day I announced that we were being given music lessons. She was very disturbed. To her, music had lewd associations. It was the monopoly of harlots and beggars and not meant for gentle folk. She said nothing, but her silence meant disapproval. She rarely talked to me after that. Here in this paragraph, the narrator is pointing out that past, he and his grandmother spent less time together. For a while, she still woke him up and helped him get ready for school. However, when he returned home and shared what he learned in the English school, such as English words, scientific concepts like gravity and Archimedes' principle, and the idea that the world is round. His grandmother became unhappy. She felt disconnected from his education as she couldn't help him with his lesson and did not believe in what he was being taught at the English school. She was particularly there was no focus on God and the scriptures in his education. When the narrator mentioned that they would be receiving music lessons, she was disturbed because she associated music with inappropriate behavior, seeing as something linked to harlots and girls not suitable for respectable people. Although she didn't express her feelings verbally, her silence conveyed her disapproval, leading to a growing distance in relationship. Finally, the passage creates the cultural and the general what general rational gap between the narrator and his grandmother, highlighting her discomfort with the changes in her education and values. When I went to university, I was given a room own. The common link of friendship was snapped. My grandmother accepted her seclusion with resignation. She rarely left her spinning wheel to talk to anyone. From sunrise to sunset, she sat by her wheel spinning and reciting prayers. Only in the afternoon she relaxed for a while to feed the sparrows, while she sat in the veranda breaking the bread into bits. Hundreds of little birds collect her, creating a variable bedlam of chirrupings. Some came and perched on others on her shoulders, even sat on her head. She smiled but never shooed them away. It was to be the happiest half hour of the day for her. So here the narrator in this paragraph describes the changes took further that occurred after to university and was given his own room there. So this separation marked the end of the close bondage he shared with us with his grandmother. Accepting her solitude grew into herself and spent most of her time at home. She rarely left her spinning wheel, where she would sit for sunrise to sunset, spinning and reciting prayers. In the afternoon, she took a break to feed the sparrows in the courtyard as she broke bread into small pieces for the birds. Many of them would gather around her, creating a lively and noisy scene. Some birds would even land on her legs, shoulders, and head. Though she smiled at this joyful chaos, she never shooed, chased those birds away. She never did. This daily ritual became the happiest moment of her day, highlighting her nature and the simple pleasure in feeding the sparrows. So the passage finally emphasizes her quiet resilience and contentment she found in her routine even as her relationship with the narrators changed. When I decided to go abroad for further studies, I was sure my grandmother would be upset. Away for 5 years, and at one could never tell, but my grandmother, she was not even sentimental. She came to live me at the railway station but did not talk or show any emotion. Her lips moved in prayer, her mind was lost in prayer, her fingers were busy telling the beats of her rosary. Silently she kissed my forehead, and when I left, I cherished the most imprint as perhaps the last sign of physical contact between us. So, here in this paragraph, the narrator reflects on his decision to study abroad for 5 years, knowing that he was sure that grandmother would likely be upset about his departure. Given her age, he felt concerned about how she would cope with him being away for so long. However, his grandmother surprised him with her reaction. She remained composed, not even sentimental during their farewell at the railway station. Instead of expressing her feelings, she focused on her prayers, her lips moving silently and her fingers counting the beats of her rosary. When it was time for him to leave, she gave him a gentle kiss on the forehead. The narrator cherishes this moment as the most imprint of her kiss, viewing it as possibly the last physical connection they would share. This passage highlights the grandmother's strength and devotion as well as the deep emotional bond between them, even in silence. The kiss symbolizes their connection, making it a poignant moment of farewell as he embarks on his new journey. Okay, as he moves for his new journey. But that was not so. After 5 years, I came back home and was met by her at the station. She did not look a day older. She still had no time for words, and while she clasped me in her arms, I could hear her reciting her prayers. Even on the first day of my arrival, her happiest moments were with her sparrows, whom she fed longer with the frivolous rebukes. Here, in this paragraph, the narrator tells us more that when he had returned home after 5 years of studying abroad and is greeted at the station by his grandmother, he notices that she has not aged at all during her absence. She looks just as she did when he had left her. Although she embraces him warmly, she still prioritizes her prayer, giving the priority to her prayers over conversation, reciting them even as they reunite. So, on the first day back, the grandmother's joy is evident in her interactions with the sparrows. She takes her time to feed them, doing so with a playful attitude, giving them light-hearted re- reprimands as she scatters the bread. Passage here highlights the grandmother's unchanged routine again and devotion to her daily practices, which we have observing throughout the paragraphs that we discussed. That her unchanged routine and devotion practices, emphasizing her contentment and the bond she and nature. It illustrates a sense of continuity in her life despite the narrator's absence, as her love for the sparrows remains a central part of her happiness. Even in the evening, a change came over her. She did not pray. She collected the women of the neighborhood, got an old drum, and started to sing. For several hours, she trumped the saging skins of the dilapidated drum, and sang of the homecoming of warriors. We had to persuade her to stop to avoid overstraining. That was the first time since I had known her that she did not pray. So, here in this paragraph, the narrator had observed a notable change in his grandmother's behavior in the evening after his return home. Instead of engaging in her usual prayers, she gathers the women from the neighborhood and brings out an old drum. For several hours, she enthusiastically plays the drum and sings songs celebrating the return of warriors, a joyful and energetic departure from her normal routine. The narrator and others had to convince her to stop drumming and singing to prevent her from overexerting herself, as this was a departure from her typical quiet and prayerful demeanor. This moment is significant because it marks the first time that the narrator had seen his grandmother not engaged in prayer. It highlights her joy and excitement at his return, showcasing a side of her that is lively and expressive, revealing the depth of her feelings and the importance of the occasion for her. The next morning, she was taken ill. It was a mild fever, and the doctor told us that it would go. But my grandmother thought differently. She told us that her end was near. She said that since only a few hours before the close of the last chapter of her life, she had omitted to pray. She was not going to waste any more time talking to us. So here we see that the narrator is describing how his grandmother falls ill the morning, okay, in the morning after his joyful return. Although the doctor reassures the family that her mild fever will pass away, the grandmother had a different understanding. She believed that her time was coming to an end and expresses this belief to her family. She reflects on the previous evening when she had chosen to not to pray, feeling that it was very important, but because of that, she did not want to spend her remaining time talking with them. The passage highlights the grandmother's strong beliefs and her acceptance of her situation, illustrating her focus on prayer and spirituality. It also emphasizes the gravity of her condition and foreshadows her approaching death, creating a poignant moment in the narrative. We protested, but she ignored our protest. She lay peacefully in bed praying and telling her beads. Even before we could suspect, her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. A peaceful pallor spread on her face, and we knew that she was dead. Here, the narrator is telling us that along with his family, okay, narrator and his family tried to persuade the grandmother to engage with them despite her illness, but she disregarded their pleas. Okay, she remained calm and shrined in bed, focused on her prayers and counting the beads of her rosary. Before they realized it, her lips cease to move and the rosary slips from her fingers, indicating that she has passed away. A peaceful look settles on her face, signaling her death. This moment is very powerful and sober, highlighting her acceptance of her fate and her dedication to her faith even in her final moments. The family's realization of her death is profound, marking the end of her and the deep loss they felt. We lifted her off the bed and, as in customary, laid her on the ground and covered her with a red shroud. After a few hours of mourning, we left her alone to arrangements for her funeral. In the evening, we went to her room with a crude stretcher to take to the cremated. The sun was setting and had lit her room and veranda with a blaze of golden light. We stopped halfway in the courtyard, all over the veranda and in her room, right up to where she lay dead and stiff wrapped in the bed shroud. Thousands of sparrows scattered on the floor. There was no chirruping. We for the birds, and my mother fetched some bread for them. She broke it into little crumbs, the way my grandmother used to, and threw it to them. The sparrows took no notice of the bread when we carried my grandmother's corpse off. They flew away quietly. Next morning, the sweeper swept the breadcrumbs into the dustbin. So finally, the narrator is describing that the rituals following his grandmother's death. After she passes away, her body is placed on the ground and covered with a red, in keeping with customary practices. After a period of mourning, the family prepares for her funeral. When they return in the evening to take her body for cremation, they found her room bath bathed in golden light from the setting sun. In the country yard, they noticed that thousands of sparrows have gathered in her room and on the veranda, completely silent and still. Compassion for the birds. The narrator's mother breaks bread into small pieces and throws to them, mimicking how the grandmother used to feed them. However, the sparrows ignore the bird, and when the family carries the grandmother's body away, the birds quietly fly off. The next morning, the sweeper cleans up the leftover crumbs, highlighting the finality of the grandmother's passing away. So, this scene is poignant, emphasizing the connection between the grandmother and the sparrows, highlighting their mourning and the absence of life and joy following her death. It illustrates the deep impact of her loss on both her family and the creatures she cared for. So, what the moral that we reflect to ourselves or we get after studying this? Okay, the portrait of the lady is that the story highlights the beauty of unconditional love, devotion, and the peaceful acceptance of life's inevitable end. That means nobody can escape death. Okay, so finally, if like and you enjoyed discussion, so I just say one thing: you also should help some classmates of yours to understand and enjoy the same way as you are enjoying. So let them come with their own expression and attempt in the best way whatever the questions comes in the exam. Okay. So finally, just this help. If you do, you also will be helped and the rest of them also will get the benefit of what you are getting right now. Okay, so overview, let us try to understand from the beginning till the end of the story within few minutes. So, in the portrait of lady, Khushwant Singh reflects on her close bond with his grandmother, a serene, deeply religious woman. She cared for him during childhood, but their relationship changed as he grew older and embraced modern education. After his return from studying abroad, Western education or modern education, his grandmother, who found joy in feeding sparrows, briefly celebrated in homecoming before falling ill. She peacefully passed away while praying, and during her funeral, thousands of silent sparrows gathered, refusing food, symbolically mourning her death. So, this is all, and thank you for spending your time to understand and enjoy this chapter. And just give one thumbs up to, okay, and share for so that they would enjoy and enjoy in attempting the answers connecting to the chapter. Thank you. We'll meet with topic, that is the point of photograph. Okay. Thank you, and keep reading and revising. Okay, keep reading and revising, and have your self interest too while you read the chapter. Thank you.